Good evening. I'd like to call to order the special Common Council meeting. Today is March 17th and it is 5 p.m. I'll ask our clerk, Joanne Marcon, to call the roll.
Mayor Kim Smith,
Present?
Mike Milky,
Here.
Sean McAllister,
Here.
Dan Stevens,
Present.
Diane Wolf. Here. Stephen Knott,
Present.
Larry Jurassic.
Present.
Okay, we are all in attendance. Item 2 is public input. At this time, any members from the public may address the Common Council. If you choose to do so, please begin by stating your name and your address and limit your comments to 3 minutes per individual. Would anyone from the public like to address the Common Council at this time? Second call for anyone wishing to address the Common Council this evening. Welcome, sir.
Hello, I'm Jared Benson, live at W6643 Lawrence Place, Town of Onalaska. Obviously, I'm on the fire department. I just want to take a minute and say thank you, and we appreciate your time and dedication to taking on this study, continuing to keep our foot on the gas for this department and the whole area we serve. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to address the Common Council this evening? Looking for anyone else who wishes to address the Common Council. Is there anyone online, Joanne? Their hand raised? Okay.
We have City Administrator Rick Neumeyer online and Sabrina Steger is currently as well.
Okay. Any last call for any public input? Okay, public input is now closed and we'll move on for consideration and possible action on the following items. First, we'll have a presentation by Short, Elliott, and Hendrickson Incorporated of the Fire Department Staffing and Facility Study. Chief, would you like to introduce this item? We'll introduce Pete Floody, our Onalaska Police Chief. Or, I'm sorry, Fire Chief.
I know what you meant.
Hopefully you know the difference.
Yeah, with us today is Trevor Frank, Senior Architect. Right over here. Chuck Leipzig, Public Safety Operational Planner, and Jeremy Tomish, Senior Professional Engineer. So we've been working on the study for, well, over 5 months now with the SCH team. We met at least bi-weekly during that time. Extensively examined data, included call volume, call locations, response times, and just a whole plethora of data points throughout the study. On top of that, SCH conducted interviews of administrative staff, full-time staff, part-time staff, department heads, as well as the city administrator and mayor. I just want to thank the SCH team for conducting a very thorough and comprehensive study of the Onalaska Fire Department. I also want to thank city staff that took time out of their day to help answer questions for the study, the mayor, the emergency dispatch center, tri-state ambulance staff, and everyone else that was impacted by this. So I just very appreciative of everybody's cooperation. Also feel very confident that SCH certainly provided us with a very thorough study of our current facilities, staffing levels, and operations, as well as offering some options for improvement moving forward. So with that, I'll let SCH, Chuck, take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Welcome, gentlemen.
And there is an extra mic there too. If you'd both like to have a mic, you're welcome to have that.
I'm going to slide over as soon as Chuck takes over here.
Okay.
So I think we'll be good. Yeah. Good afternoon. As Chief mentioned, I'm Trevor Frank. I'm a senior architect and principal with Short, Elliott, Hendrickson. I was responsible for developing the information that I'm going to present with you tonight, along with another architect that I'll introduce in a second here. We'll just do some quick brief introductions of the SCH team that's present. I'll introduce a few folks that worked on this that aren't present this evening, and then we'll get right into the presentation.
As Trevor said, thank you. I'm Chuck Leipzig with SCH Operational Planner. I've been here for about 4 years. Recently retired from the city of Kenosha in the fire service for 35 years, retiring as chief. So I was kind of ecstatic to be part of this study as well, and thank the rest of the folks that chatted with us, and chief and his assistant chief as well. Jeremy.
All right, thanks, Chuck. Again, my name is Jeremy Tomish, engineer on the project. helped with some of the site selection work and the community liaison. Our firm's been doing work with the city for 20+ years, so we're really thankful for the opportunity to put the study together, and I'm really looking forward to be able to present this information here today. All right. There a trick sheet?
Right now, Chief.
Oh, perfect. All right, so I'm just gonna, this is really our introductory slide. There's a couple of names up there that I'd like to introduce on the SEH side. So Mark Zavitkovitz is an architect with SEH. He's also a paid-on-call firefighter in the village of Germantown. Mark worked on this alongside of me as the architectural assistants on this. Mike Sternagel is our GIS specialist. Some of the heat mapping and response mapping that you'll see in our presentation tonight was done by Mike Sternagel, our GIS specialist. There'd been a lot of accolades and thank yous flying around, and we would be remiss if we did not thank Onalaska staff representatives that we spent a tremendous amount of time with. They sacrificed a lot of time to be with us and give us the background information that we needed to draw the conclusions that you're going to see tonight. So I want to thank Chief Fleddy and Assistant Chief Southworth. Mayor Smith, thank you for your participation in this. Finance Director Stager and Public Works Director Halter, as well as several of the firefighters from Onalaska were instrumental in pulling this together. The agenda is really broken into two pieces tonight. I won't go through each of the items on each side of the agenda, but Chuck's going to start out talking about fire operations, and then I'm going to wrap it up with the long-term facility assessment, the physical needs for the department in terms of space. So just to give you a quick executive summary of where we've been the last 5+ months, as Chief mentioned, we met bi-weekly for the last 5 months, discussed several different options. There were 3 distinct areas of focus. These were identified in the request for proposal when we submitted our proposal to the city. Some of it evolved a little bit based on conversations, because you don't know what you don't know until you really get into it and lift the hood and start understanding the operations. And that's really where Chuck looked at this from the fire department operations side. The second area of focus was the long-term facility assessment. So what do you got and what do you need? Based on the long-term recommendations of staffing and location, growth within the community, what does that look like in terms of impact on the fire department over the long haul? And then the GIS response analysis, and I'll get into that a little bit. Chuck also will use that information. So that information both fed the operations side and it fed the facility side, identifying locations for future stations and so forth. So we analyzed the staffing and operations. We needed to determine the current and future space needs, as I mentioned. We explored the feasibility of future potential sites, and I'll take a deeper dive on that in my portion of the report tonight. And then we developed recommendations based on the long-term projections for the department. So this is where I'm going to step aside, and I'm going to let Chuck take a deeper dive into the work that he provided for this study.
Thank you. Again, as Trevor said, we met with a few, quite a few folks. I'd be remiss because I'm going to miss a couple, but folks from Gunderson Tri-State, La Crosse County, as well as several representatives from the city of Onalaska. We talked with some people from Holmen as well as the town of Onalaska. We also talked with some of the collective bargaining unit as well as several firefighters in various ranks to get a good overview of what the department has to offer and what some of the shortcomings and strengths are. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So overview, City of Onalaska as well as the town of Onalaska per contract. Also auto aid with Holmen. Auto aid is an agreement that when a fire comes in, both municipalities respond to the other municipality if they're available for bigger events. And mutual aid with very, very many other organizations as well, and they're in the study. As we move on, you'll see a number. It's like if you see above introduction and scope 1. So that'll correlate to that part of the study. This is going to be a very brief overview. We're probably going to scratch the surface on a lot of things, but not really get in depth. So the study does that. And by all means, if you have questions, stop us as we go. Also, the relationship with Gunderson Amplify EMS. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So staffing, the town of Onalaska, the city of Onalaska has 20 full-time people. The two administrative folks are the two gentlemen you see in front of you. They work 40 hours. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get into job descriptions, as well as the 18 full-time operational people. So those are the individuals that answer the call and do many, many other things for emergency and non-emergency operations, as well as a part-time administrative assistant that works 30 hours a week and 4 staff minimum ops. So this is we'll talk about that as we get into the hierarchy as well. The city of Onalaska has 6 people on duty every day. They do shifts of 48 hours followed by 96 hours off. So it's called a 3-platoon system. So typically it's 24 on, 48 off. In their case, they went to a 48-96. So it's 2 days on, 4 days off. What that means is 56 hours. So they work 56 hours in a week on an average of a 3-week cycle. It's a little complex, but if you have questions, we can certainly answer as we go. So the minimum staffing will be 4 per shift. So there's 6 assigned. The difference between 6 and 4 are vacations, sicknesses, things like that. If the chief had a policy that said 6 people on duty every day, then he would be backfilling and paying overtime for staff vacancies. So that's why he has determined 4. So a little bit about the history of Onalaska. Started as a volunteer fire company in 1894. That kind of coincides with a lot of municipalities just out of need. It's usually businessmen or farmers that get together and decide we need some type of fire protection, whether it's bucket brigade or, back then, certainly there wasn't a lot of automation. So the first fire call was in 1900. And since then, the last year's call was 2,227 calls. So that's a lot of difference between, of course, 1900 and today's date. So typically volunteer companies were all self-funding. So they did their own fundraiser, bake sales, whatever, to gain money to buy equipment and to fund their operations. And it was strictly volunteer. Since then, a lot of things have changed, obviously. State, local requirements require training. They require a lot of certifications, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And it is at the end of the study, too, that talks about what a firefighter has to have in order to even get on the rig or to be part of the organization. So what started as a volunteer fire company is now a very highly trained professional organization. That being said, a lot of departments morph between a volunteer to a combination staff, and that's what Onalaska is right now. Combination means they have a contingency of full-time and a contingency of paid on call, paid on premises, or volunteer. That's what a paid on call is, and that's what a combination department is. So a little bit about the building. You probably know this better than I do. I don't want to speak for the folks here, but the prior building was attached to City Hall in 1967, and this was all from the Public Works director as well. And a remodel to accommodate overnight staff because that's when full-time started in 1999. And the current building dissects operation and administration. So that was one of the chief's things that he wanted us to talk about is some of the inefficiencies, having staff up over here and fire department over here. And it's more than just that, but we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So the organizational chart, you can see it. 3 to 5 is a span of control for anybody in an emergency operation. It's paramilitary and it's hierarchy, meaning it's like an upside down tree. The head of the organization is the fire chief. Under him reports the assistant chief, various ancillary positions such as training, CRR. Sorry, my vision isn't good from here. CRR staff as well as paid on call staff, which is 8 right now. And under that, the 3-platoon system, A shift, B shift, C shift, every shift has a lieutenant on it, or it has to have an organizer or a boss, so to speak. So there's 1 lieutenant and 3 firefighters for each shift. The daily operations and the staffing is based on need. If there's 6 available, there'll be 6 on duty that day. If there's only 4 available, there'll be 4. If there's less than 4, the chief will hire overtime to have a 4-person minimum for a lot of different reasons. And we'll talk about that as we get into NFPA 1710. So depending on paid on call as well, will depend on whether they get additional help. So typically it'll be 1 unit with 4 people or 2 units with 2 people apiece. And if there's paid on call staff that can report to a fire or a scene, they'll do that as appropriate. So we're going to do a SWOT analysis. It's kind of it's a short way. We're all about acronyms in the fire service as well as military. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the strengths of the department are many. Attitude and culture hand in hand. Everybody I talked to without exception has been very positive and congruent with the mission. People are here for a reason. It's not about the pay. It's more about the profession. It's more about pride. It's more about helping other people. That leads to a positive culture. Attitude and culture are hand in hand, and they bring with them a lot of positive attributes that transcend outside of the department. Another strength is neighboring support. A lot of municipalities also contribute. We'll talk a little bit about some of the inhibitions of the municipalities that are part of the mutual aid organization as well. but specifically Holman and La Crosse also are very, very much part of the mutual organization. Gunderson Amplify relationship, I feel, is a positive relationship as well in their EMS delivery. Weaknesses, staff level. That's kind of the recurrent theme through all of this. Even as we get into NFPA staffing, we'll talk a little bit about that. 4-person on a bigger operation is just very inhibitive to operations. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that more later. Pertinent documentation. So a lot of the recommendations we make are based on data. Everything is about data. Some of the data is just not captured. And I think it's just a representative of a department transcending from a volunteer, a partial, to a full-time professional organization. A lot of that data is not gathered. It's not really anybody's fault. It's just when we get to a point where we need to extract data, we don't have data to extract. So there's some limitations and some holes in the data that we were able to get. We'll talk about that again. And the combination model right now is a little bit inhibitive too of staffing. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to recommendations. Opportunities, positive culture, proactive management, leadership succession. All this culture creates a positive image and people want to be part of that. So I see that in everybody I interview and everybody we talk to, very positive about the organization. And it's been great to work with the individuals that we've talked to as well. Threats, staff health and safety. That's the biggie. NIOSH reports are full of all kinds of accidents. We call it the Swiss cheese model. Staffing is a big part of that. We need staff in order to develop some of these plans and prevent some of the injuries and accidents that happen as part of emergency delivery. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that as we get into the rest of the presentation. Current facility infrastructure, while it looks nice, it's well kept, there are some inhibitions to it. As staff grows, it's going to be inhibitive. It's also inhibitive to a diverse culture, as well as some safety and health issues. The other glaring issue is the distance with operations and fire department right now, administration. The workout facility is in the basement. They don't get a radio signal, so it kind of inhibits them from doing any workouts. If the firefighters are up talking to the fire chief, it's going to take them additional time to get to the floor to answer the call. And by the same token, if the chief or the assistant chief are downstairs doing that, they're not in their area. So it's a little bit inhibitive, and we'll talk about that a little as well. Work details and job descriptions. This is scratching the surface. This is not by all means what all of these folks do, but the fire chief is the head of the department. He's the guy that answers all of you folks, and he also from below takes all of that data and creates a plan and organization. He's responsible for risk analysis, budgetary items, discipline, control, policies, all of that, in addition to doing some of the day-to-day operations. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into it too. Assistant fire chief is the second-hand person. He does a lot of the same things that the fire chief does. Both of them are considered administrative positions at 40 hours, but I'm probably guessing that they do more than 40 hours because both of these chiefs also answer calls and operate as incident commander and incident safety officer on the bigger events where they don't have staffing. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Fire lieutenant, command of duty, day-to-day operations, personal accountability, daily work duty planning, staff scheduling, and command of emergencies. So this is the individual that gathers the mess and makes it happen. They answer the calls, they set up the structure, and they're also responsible for the individual crews that they work with. And on emergency operations, they're going to be the initial incident commander, meaning they're the ones that roll up to the scene and make the call. Firefighter, I'm sorry, we're going to go to CRR. CRR is community risk reduction. In this case, it's inspections, fall prevention, community outreach, public education, department marketing, and social media. Community risk reduction is about putting out some of those emergencies before they exist. It's prevention on the front end to eliminate some of these calls. As an example, elder communities, and we'll talk about that as we get into our GIS mapping. Firefighters, emergency response, all daily tasks, maintenance, housework, rig checks, inspections, everything that doesn't get done by the administrative staff, including the house chores, cleaning the toilets, it's all their responsibility. Paid on call staff, all of the same responsibilities of the firefighters, but it's when they have time or when they're able to staff either the engine house or a fire rig. So staff work hours, as we talked, 20 individuals in total. Fire chief and assistant chief typically work a 40-hour work week. Again, they take turns off time, either answering calls as an incident commander or a safety officer. They have a part-time administrative assistant that works 30 hours a week. This is a little bit inhibitive, and part of the recommendations we're going to make is to increase that to 40 hours a week, because right now the fire chief and the assistant chief are also doing administrative duties that take them away from some of the emergency operations and duties that they need to do as well. So the emergency response staff, we talked about that, 56 hours, so 2 days on with 4 days off. POC and CRR varies as a result of the availability and the need. So calls for service, that's kind of really why we're here, talk about the increase in calls for service. If we didn't have calls for service, obviously this wouldn't be an issue, but you can see, again, my vision isn't that good, but it's 49% increase since 2013, which equates to about 5.3% of a yearly increase in average, which in our assumption is a little high. So if you see that it's not a straight line, it's also a little bit of a curve. So that means to me that there's something changing in the community to make that rise exponentially, not on a line, a complete line. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the GIS areas here. So here's the GIS heat map. And I think administrative staff is going to kind of locate where some of those things are. I don't have a pointer, but if you look in the center of the city, there's a yellow dot where we are. That's the fire department. So that's where all emergency operations respond from. So you can see there's 4 separate heat areas in that map. So you see all the way out to the west, the red spot right there. That is out in the eastern portion of the city. And it's also a housing development there. And we'll get to that as we get to some of the super users, we'll call them. The immediate area in the belly of the city as we speak, it's an aging area that also has high density. And if you look to it looks like 2 eyes at the top, those are high density housing developments as well. Everything outside of that center area is going to be well over 4 minutes response time to get to that area. So the top 5 super users, it's actually 6. So the Emerald Drive, this is 12% of the calls over the course of 3 years for 5 addresses. And that's typical of a community. That's just how it works. So the Emerald Drive, I didn't want to put the addresses in there for privacy reasons. But an Emerald Drive one where you saw the red spot way on the eastern area is an 8 to 10 minute drive. It's an elderly housing complex, and it's 2 addresses that amount to 224 calls. And down from there, successive Mason Street is a little bit closer, but you can see that's high density as well. Main Street, which is very close, we're very well situated to handle emergencies there. 12th Avenue and then Critter Court is more out by, is that on the eastern side as well? So that's more out by the housing density on the eastern side. That's just kind of a representative of why it's important to kind of get these call volumes and situate in areas that we can respond quicker to some of these areas. Mutual aid, just more of a, I guess, a curiosity. Mutual aid exists when departments are small enough that they can't build, and it's not even small departments, it's larger departments. It's an agreement with neighboring communities to help us when we're in need, and by the same token, we help them when they're in need. There's 3 organizations that are full-time in this whole area. It's La Crosse, Onalaska, and Holmen. So everybody outside of that is either paid on call, partial department, or volunteer, meaning you don't know when you're going to get them. So that's an inhibition in this area. If we upscale to something that's bigger, they're going to get 2 different units and maybe some back calls from intra-city staff. So we're going to talk about that as we move ahead into some of the, how many people they're getting on calls in particular. So overlapping incidences, this is one that the chief was kind of curious about, and the data proved that, in fact, he's right. So overlapping incidents, what happens when they're on a call and another call comes in? So if there's nobody at the engine house to take that call, what happens? It either goes to a mutual aid company or more likely staff that are on the first call are aware of what's going on, and they either try to hurry up the call if they can, if they're available. And if not, they're either going to wait until a mutual aid company comes, or they're going to wait till they're free. So as you can see, from 2020 to 2021, it almost doubled in overlapping incidences. And again, these are times when there's no available another unit to take a call. So we're going to talk about NFPA 1710 a little bit. National Fire Protection Agency, in addition to many other things, talks about staffing. They talk about times, and we'll talk about times in a little bit. So we're going to kind of build out what a fire would entail. This is just a simple single-family fire. This is not a high-risk strip mall or a high-density apartment. This is just a single-family residence. And it's a graphic to kind of show how it would work. So NFPA 1710 says we have to have an incident commander. So whenever we have a fire that upscales into anything that's on fire, causes an IDLH, which is a immediate danger to life or health or safety. So anytime an individual goes into a fire that needs an SCBA, this is how the build out has to go. We have to have an incident commander. And on Alaska's case, the incident commander isn't first on scene. It's going to be that initial unit that shows up on scene. So that's one. Water supply is one. So whoever driving the engine has to control the water. We have to get the water into the fire to make it happen. That means securing a hydrant, as well as getting that water to the hose line for the crews to get a hose line in. 2 attack lines. That's where the work is. So this is 4 people on 2 attack lines. So if we're adding up, we're at 5 right now. Backup utility control and forcible entry. A lot of things have to happen to get into a fire. A lot of people don't realize it. It's not just putting the water on the fire, it's also getting into the fire. It's getting at elevated surfaces that may need ventilation. It's controlling resources, electrical and gas, so that we're not having additional hazards. So we're at 7 right now. Search and rescue team. So we haven't even started to talk about, getting in and to get somebody out. If we have a victim in the fire, it takes an additional 2 people to locate and extricate those victims. Ladder movement and ventilation. So anytime we affect a rescue, we need to control the water and we need to ventilate the building to get the bad stuff out. If you don't get the smoke and the superheated gases out, it creates additional hazards to the firefighters in the building. So we're up to 11. Rapid intervention crew. By state and federal law, anytime we put anybody inside the building in an IDLH environment, we have to have 2 people outside to be able to effect a rescue to the people inside. This is all federal law. So you can see where this is going. We're building. And then we have an aerial operator. Anything over 2 stories is going to require an aerial. So we'll need an aerial operator for that. So this is 17. This is when NFPA 1710 says has to be at initial fire. 2 additional rules, and this is where the chiefs come into. OSHA says 2 in, 2 out. That's what the rescue team is. So anytime we have 2 people in, we need 2 people out to be able to account for those 2 people and go in and get them out if they need to. And NFPA 1721 says we need to have an incident safety officer at all these calls. So anytime anything escalates, we have to have a safety officer that's got eyes on whatever's happening. He's distancing himself from the operations of the fire. It can be somebody else. It doesn't need to be an extra person, but these are just legislative rules that we need to follow as we do these things. And that's where the chief and the deputy chief come in. They'll either take control or they'll act as incident safety commanders. So what I want to do is, if you give me a little bit of latitude, I want to kind of work through a fire a little bit. And I was going to pick on somebody, if I can pick on somebody on the audience. Lieutenant Velblum. So this isn't a trick question. What is this?
It looks like a single family residence that has a working fire going on, smoke coming from the roof. Chuck asked what this was, and it looks like a single family residence that has a working fire going on.
So give me an example of what would be dedicated to the resources on initial.
So we operate with 4 to 6 individuals coming on 1 or 2 trucks. So first due engine, I would likely be on with 3 other individuals. We would show up, and once we get eyes on it, it is my job to kind of make a decision tactically what we're going to be doing. Given this situation, obviously there's a working fire. We have a van that's parked in the front, middle of the day. So given that there's a van parked out front, we've got to assume that there's probably an occupant in there unless we get report of all clear and evacuation, which we don't see any evacuation. So at that point, I would probably be declaring like a search and rescue is our tactical objective. So as the first due officer, I would be establishing command. One of my jobs is to do a 360 of the residence to see if there's, what's going on the entire residence. You can get just a snapshot of the alpha side, but there might be somebody that has gotten out the back incapacitated that we need to get to. The engineer, the driver of the truck, is tied up with the truck as far as pumping operations. So there's 2 other people in the engine, which their duties would be to get geared up, masked up. They need to pull a line. They need to go to the front door if that's where we're going to make entry. And, if the door is locked, they're going to need to gain entry with tools to force the door open so we can get in there. If we have 6 on duty and they're not obligated to another call, they're going to be on the truck aerial apparatus behind us. Given this situation, assuming that there's probably an occupant in there, they're going to be bumped up. They're going to forego any hydrant hooking and going to have them doing like search and rescue. So I get done with the 360. Hopefully the 2 guys in the back of the engine have got a line pulled. They're out the front door waiting, gained access. We've got the 2 other guys on the truck. So that gives us, 5 people to go in and try to do pretty much a fire attack and search and rescue. Given that there's smoke coming from the entire roof line, I would say that visibility is probably going to be just horrendous. So, ventilation would be something that we would need to have in short order because sometimes it's hard to see, your hand in front of your face, much less search a residence and try to find an occupant. So yeah, I guess that's
All right.
with the initial, 6 do.
Let's stop you there. So
All
you
right.
do have a 6 people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Appreciate it. The reason I did that is to kind of put him on the spot a little bit and give you a taste of what goes on in somebody's mind as they do this. He's a lieutenant. He's got some years of experience. It's not unusual for a firefighter to be on that call and making the call and trying to decide, we don't know what time of day is it. He made a very good call. He did exactly what I think everybody else would do. But the reality is he forewent some very critical safety features in the event to possibly get a rescue out of. We're assuming somebody's in there. We have to assume that until otherwise. So we're going in there without a hose line and they're going in there without ventilation, 2 things that are very dangerous. So that's the reason I did that. It wasn't to put him on the spot or to make anybody feel bad. It's more to give you an example of he's doing that with 6 people. And the last slide, nationally recognized, says you need 17 to do it. If you can get in and get it out and do some of the things they're doing quickly, it prevents a lot of that. But the reality is, as these things build in the attic, maybe he doesn't know that, it increases the risk. So talking about staffing, my eyes aren't that good. I'm hoping that you guys have that in your presentation. But one of the glaring data for me was looking at how many people do we have on calls. As you see, it just goes from frequency. So the number 1 is 2 per 2. I'm going to move over there. So this is over the course of 3 years, and this is just active fire. So this could be anything from a garage fire, a dryer vent fire. It's just NFPA codes them in different areas, and I searched all fires. So these were all fires that are going to require somebody to put on an SCBA and go into a fire. So 2 individuals, 653 times, 3 individuals, 432 times. You can see where I'm going with it. So look all the way at the end. So in 3 years, they've only had two incidences that they've had 13 people on calls, and NFPA calls for 17. So that's just the glaring deficit that I see in the number one threat to the organization. Okay, so we're going to talk about 2 things on one slide. We're going to talk a little bit about POC hours. So one of the things Chief wanted to look at is feasibility of paid on call right now. Volunteerism has taken a drastic dive nationwide. It's not just around here, it's all over the place. And there are very few organizations that we're working with that aren't seeing a drastic dip in not just recruitment of fire people, but it's also the volunteer spirit. So that being said, when we started this, they had 10 and they're down to 8 now. So we looked at POC hours as in how often are they showing up on calls. Of course, the 3 years, which is the data on the left, it was 487 total hours of on-call time for an average 162 over the course of 3 years. The next slide over was actually 3.5 years. That's not correct. It's 3 years and like 6 months. And what we wanted to do is call out what are they doing on calls? Are they showing up to the scene? Or are they standing by to take another calls? It's both. They're both essential tasks. But when we look at active emergencies, you can see it's 274 hours over the course of 3.5 years. Community risk reduction, again, is just another example of what fire departments are doing to reduce the risk and reduce calls on the front end. Fall coalitions, drug abuse, stuff like that. So we're going to get into times. So this is where some of the data I had could give us some information. Other data we couldn't retrieve to give us an accurate picture. So that being said, La Crosse County was very gratuitous in providing me some information. This is all calls, and NFPA says when I pick up the call, it should be less than 15 seconds, 95% of the time that somebody on the other end should be picking it up. The County of La Crosse does that. They do that 95% of the time, but they weren't able to call out fire department only. So this is fire, law enforcement, and all the fire operations that it's 138,000 calls over the course of 3 years. So if they're doing that 138,000 times at a 95 percentile rate at 15 seconds, we have to assume they're doing well in the fire department. Dispatch time is a little bit different. So NFPA says they have to dispatch that call from the time they take the call out the door, and 64 seconds, I'm sorry, in 99 seconds, 90% of the time. Right now, they're 35 seconds over that 64 second standard. So you can see where the line is. And again, 90 percentile means 90% of the time they have that call out the door in 64 seconds. Turnout time and on-scene times. So we're following the logic, 10 seconds to answer the call, 64 seconds to get it out the door. The fire department has 60 seconds for EMS and 80 seconds for fire to get their stuff on and get out the door. 90% of the time. And you can see by the data there. You can see by the data, there's also some shortcomings in that response as well. And there's a lot of different reasons that could be. One of the reasons is they may be here. You know, I'm not dinging them, but they may be here and it may take them a little longer to get to the call. The other thing is they're cross-staffing various rigs. As we get to the apparatus, we'll talk about that too. So they're responsible for 4 or 5 rigs on any given day. So they may have their booths over here and may have to grab that and get on an engine company, a rescue company. That's just kind of how it works. So the out the door time, 90 percentile is 131 over that 90 percentile for fire and 1.26 over that percentile for rescue. So first arriving on scene times, NFPA says now you have 240 seconds to get there. So you're out the door. Again, we're doing the math, 10 seconds, 64 seconds. Now you've got 4 minutes to get to the call. So we have 4 minutes to get to the call. For the first rig, 360, which is 6 minutes for the second rig, 480 for the full build out, and 610 for a high risk. We'll stop at the first one because La Crosse County doesn't gather anything more than the first unit on scene. It's just an inhibition in the data that they keep, and all they keep is the first rig on scene. And if you look at the data on that as well, got one. For rescue, we are the first. So we'll go down to the bottom page of 30, might be a little better representation for you, and it's the same data we have up here. So 4,900 calls, 26 were within 4 minutes. The average response time was 4 minutes, 19 seconds, but the 90 percentile is still 3 minutes above standard. So it's taking 3 minutes to get to all of the calls, average longer than it should be. And that's for a lot of different reasons, and we saw the heat map as well. So we'll jump to rescue. So NFPA says that a fire company with an AED should be there in 4 minutes. So the first rig with an AED, which Onalaska has, will show up in 4 minutes. Again, so 2 minutes and 4, so they're 6 minutes and 59 seconds, which is 2 minutes and 59 above that average. Now, NFP also says that an ALS unit with a transport and ALS care should be there within 8 minutes. So if you go to the next slide, this is the data that Gunderson Tri-State provided me. They have an agreement. I don't know if it's a contract or not. It seems to be an agreement that states that they have. If you look at the data, according to their agreement, they have 10 minutes and 59 seconds to show up to the city of Onalaska. The town of Onalaska is zone 3, so it's 15 seconds and 59 minutes. And you can see by the data they're making that. But NFPA says they should be there in 8 minutes. They also say that the initial unit should be there in 4 minutes. So switching gears to ISO. ISO is a governing body that controls how insurance rates are formulated for your fire insurance, not just for residential, but also for commercial, industrial, cold warehouse, whatever the case is. Every 4 to 5 years, the fire department goes through this accreditation. And what it does, it's a measure of how the fire department does in a national light. And it's based on a lot of different things. And you can see it. I'm not going to read it all to you. But Onalaska is 3 and 3Y. 3 means from 1 being the best department ever and 10 being like no department at all. Somewhere in the middle is where most departments are. So Onalaska is number 3, and they were within a half a point of making a number 2, which is very good considering staffing. And I'll draw your attention to the second, if you go down to the second body where you see 5 and 8, those are a direct reflection of the staffing. So the training, the emergency response, the planning, the rig allocation are all there. The water supply is there, the water movement. It's just a matter of allocating staff appropriately to mitigate emergencies is where the data drops. Again, it's another way for fire departments to measure how we're doing in a grand scheme of things. So this is the fleet that they have. The chief wanted me to talk about that a little bit. The fleet is well kept, in good repair, but there are 3 units in particular that are over 20 years. Most fire departments have a replacement plan that says 5, 15, 20. After 20 years, it's time to get rid of the vehicle because it costs more to repair than it's worth to use the rig. That's important as we talk about a build out and part of our recommendations. So right now, the fleet is in good shape. However, as they move forward and use the rigs more or potentially open up a second unit to run two, they might need to review that as well. So final recommendations, and this is right, it's going to follow your last couple pages. So number one would be to update the current agreement with Gunderson Tri-State to improve response times to zone 2 and 3 to better align with NFPA 1710 and potentially solidify a longer term agreement. Again, we feel this is a good relationship and a benefit to the citizens of all the communities here because it is a non-tax base charge to the citizens. Most municipalities charge for their EMS response. They do not. Number two would be capture all data times is dispatched through La Crosse County as well as Gunderson Tri-State. And these are kind of like immediate, like up to 6 months, and then there's an intermediate and then a long-term plan. So number three would be consider termination of the paid on call staff and reallocate the funds to staffing. As you can see, the hours, 162 hours, this doesn't justify the money that's being spent on it. And the reality is it costs well over $14,000 to train a firefighter. And at this point, I believe the last firefighter left for another department. So it seems that the department's training firefighters for other departments. It's not a wise investment. Develop a long-term agreement with Town Alaska for Emergency Services prior to the expiration of the contract. The reason that would be is to, as we talk about putting assets in different areas, North is going to be an area. You would want to determine how often, or are we going to continue to protect the town of Onalaska wherever you put that second station potentially. Reclassify the part-time administrative assistant to full-time. For a lot of different reasons. There are a lot of times that she's not available to do some of the things that both chiefs do, and it's just not a feasible use of their time as well. 6 would be to acquire property in the southeast current location near Highway I-90 and Interstate 16. We've identified an area, but not specific location. And that would be to better serve that particular area. And increase staffing to deploy a second emergency response unit with a 4-person minimum. So this would bring it from 4 to 8. You can see by the build out here, we're adding an additional company. Anytime we add staff, we also need to add a manager. So we'd add a captain that would be over both shifts as well. So this would bring the full-time to 8 on duty. Next would be to build an expansion station in an area identified at the southeast portion of the city to accommodate an additional unit. So there would be 2 units, one central city for now and one to the eastern area to cover that dense area. Shortly after that, the recommendation would be to look at a northeast corridor for potential location there and secure the property. Subsequent after that would be to hire 9 additional personnel to bring the ranks to an additional 9 firefighters, 3 per shift. So we'd be looking at 3 different companies that would allocate, that would be able to respond from 2 different units. And then it would be to build an expansion station to accommodate that staff. Recommendation then would be to either vacate City Hall, either sell it or allow a different, I'm sure there's a lot of different organizations or in-house services that would want it, but we would also, this is over the course of 15, 20 years. We would also suggest reevaluating that because you can see in our GIS map that the center of the city is still pretty dense. And a lot of communities will put all their assets on the outside only to find out that the inside is redeveloping. So that needs to be looked at in the future as well. And if the town of Onalaska becomes absorbed to the city of Onalaska, or if there's a long-term fire protection agreement, we'd want to potentially have, again, 3 stations as the pie in the sky goal. And that would be the staffing model as you see here. So that would be 4 units, and there'd be a lot of latitude in that. And with this model right here, again, this is 15 to 20 years out, they would be able to call mutual aid in any one company and build it out with 17 firefighters to meet NFPA 1710. Beyond that, they would obviously look at some infrastructure. Are there high-rise, high-density areas that need to be developed as well? And that would potentially increase staffing. The other thing that the chiefs would want to look at is a replacement plan for the rigs. If you kind of have two rigs going out, you can see the engine company, rescue, and truck company are the three companies that use most. The first line one is very, very new, very recent, and the second line one is 15 to 20 years old. They probably want to review that as well. Two publications, and I've included them in this, and it sounds like your next agenda talks a little bit about that after we leave, which is fantastic. This is very specific to this organization as well as many Wisconsin organizations that are facing problems with allocating staff. It's shared resources. I would encourage anybody to read them. I think they both are very current, very, very relevant, but the study didn't really, it wasn't part of the scope of the study to talk about evaluation of other staff as well. I know I breezed through that, and I'm going to turn it over to Trevor for the long-term facility.
Chuck, can we pause there for a second?
Yeah,
If
you bet.
people have immediate questions on what you've presented so far, I think maybe it'd be a good little
Please.
break. And if it's answered in the next part, we can just defer to that.
Okay.
Do the counselors have any questions immediately that you'd like to ask Stephen Knott?
I just want to confirm that I heard what I think I heard. Reference the Emerald Drive responses, that there are 2 addresses that are accounting for 224 calls.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
And obviously, these can't all be fire calls.
No, these are predominantly EMS calls, and maybe the chief could answer what the specific locale is and why that brings them there.
They are predominantly EMS calls out that way. Yes.
Are they? Well, we'll have to talk offline, I guess. I got some questions on that.
Emerald Valley itself is populated by either high density housing or assisted living. And so like it lends itself to a higher call volume to the residents on that street.
Oh, so is one of those that assisted living facility? Is that one of the addresses? All right, that makes more sense. Okay, got it.
Mhm.
I know where you're talking about.
Okay, Alder Wolf, we'll just come around here and if everyone has a question and then see if,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would assume that when I looked at the addresses, I'm familiar with all of them. I'm assuming all of them, most if not all, are for either assisted livings or nursing homes or, correct?
I don't know that there aren't any on those. On that list of the highest response areas, most of them or all of them, none of them are single family homes where there's somebody abusing the system. They're either government assisted living, multifamily dwellings, or large complexes, if you will. And I bet if you push this out and did the same study a year from now, we would have another big red dot to the north. It's just high density housing lends itself to that. We have a large population of people living in a very small area.
Thank you. That's all I have now, Your Honor.
okay, thank you. Sean, did you have any questions or comments?
Just one comment. I was really struck by the difference between what you guys described as NFPA standards and what's reality. That really kind of slapped me big time. So
Yeah, and the thing to recognize about that too is that's just talking about a single family dwelling. We're not talking about open air strip malls. You go up to 27 personnel and it goes up from there depending on the occupancy type. So, yeah.
Okay, Alder Milky?
Thank you, Mayor. I just got a quick question about that NFPA standards where it says 17 for a normal single residence house fire. Does mutual aid get, like those numbers get put into that when people are responding, or is it just our department?
You can rely on them for staffing, but you can rely on them for mutual aid to a buildup, but you can't rely on them for staffing. So even if it's easy here because there's only 2 other organizations that are going to respond. And that's why you're seeing a max of 13. It's either going to be La Crosse or Holman if they're available. So yes, you can use that on an automatic, but as we talked before, and I don't want to sound like we're not appreciative of the volunteer staff, but I think the chief said it, I'll paraphrase, when I get outside of the immediate group here, I may get somebody on a truck that maybe doesn't have an SCBA to get in. You can't rely on mutual aid outside of the 3 organizations that are central to Onalaska.
Go ahead, Chief.
Also 1710, NFPA 1710 refers to the first due response. So that doesn't count like you get on scene and you recognize you have a large fire and now you need to call for additional resources. So that's not counting that.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering is, what those numbers are, where it actually organically comes from, but that makes sense. It's what responds first.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I think too, one of the things that I know Chief and I had talked about that I didn't think came out in your presentation is one thing that I did not understand is some of the responders that we have coming in aren't the paid on call. It's our own off-duty firefighters that are coming in to give those additional responses. And I don't think that really came out. Would you maybe want to talk about that for a minute? Because I think there was a slide on that, wasn't there? There's a statistic on it. How many times the off-duty full timers are coming in to respond?
I don't know if that was referenced in itself specifically but probably a large majority. It's not that our part-time staff isn't dedicated. I started on the part-time side of the house. It's just we have transitioned, and I say we as in the fire service in general. 2018 took a big hit on us. The requirements for fire departments in general increased, and which makes it much more difficult for a guy like Bill Mishak, who has 2 young kids, to allocate enough time to be consistent enough. Now I would argue that Bill is here numerous times at 3 o'clock in the morning, but the reality is that we can't find enough Bills out there to fill the gap that we used to before. What we get now for the majority are young college students who are looking to build a resume to move to the next step, which we can't fault them for that. They're very eager while they're here, but they're here for a fairly short amount of time. So I don't know that necessarily that the study itself dictated the amount of times that full-time staff came back, but the part-time staff coming back and going on calls. It was around 200 incidents a year out of 2,227.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. Mike, did you have anything else?
Not right.
Okay, Alder Stevens?
Sure. 2 main thoughts. So I'm coming to the end of my 6-year term here, and I know that the calls have gone up from approximately 1,500 to now about 2,200 calls in the course of a year. That's almost a 50% increase. So like doing a new station back in 2019, I didn't think that we were at that point, but now we can certainly make that case. But did the study reflect future growth and where we think the people are going to be? And at some point, we're running out of places to build new buildings. I guess we're going up, but eventually we may plateau at some point. So was there thought to, in your 20-year plan, kind of what the city would look like and what the needs would be in 20 years? And how different is that from the data that we currently looked at? That was a little difficult to gather. I didn't have a lot of good data. US Census data had the historical rate rising at like less than 1% a year. So if you look out 20 years, to answer your question simply, I don't have reliable data. If we did 50% every 6 years, I don't think that's practical, that's going to go on forever. But at this point, it doesn't look like it's going to taper off anytime soon is how I would. The fact that calls are rising without population rising again speaks to different needs. And again, I think the chief's hit on it is elder care. Some of the facilities at high density, there's not a lot of places I talked to the development director and she said the same thing. There's not a lot of new territory to expand into. It's either going to be up or existing. So again, the fact that it's not straight, it's going like this means that something's happening. Is it baby boomers? Is that trend going to kick back when population decreases, or the generation? Very hard to tell. Then I guess my second thought on the 20-year plan with the recommendations, a lot of those I mean, I really can see the need, but we all recognize that the price tag is probably more than what we feasibly can do. And so is this kind of through the lens of in an ideal world, this is how we best can do this? And our job is to prioritize and, kind of make the decisions. We can do this, but not that, or You know, is there some room in the middle somewhere? It's okay if I have the chief answer that.
Yeah, I think the study outlines a way to get to what would be an ideal situation for our city of our size, whether we get to that point or not. Any step forward is a step forward nonetheless, no matter how small or how large. And I think what we're trying to point out is the fact that we don't have enough people right now to respond to an initial fire. You know, if that means getting an extra 3 people, that's 3 people more than we didn't have before. If we build a second station, we're going to be able to respond to that area in a much quicker fashion to help our citizens. So I guess this just provides all that information and kind of how we could proceed as a pie in the eye type of scenario, but any step forward is going to help us. And however we get there is council's decision, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Alder Jurassic?
Thank you, Mayor. The question I had is, how many phony calls do you guys go on? Is the percentage increasing over the last several years or pretty steady all the way across?
False alarms are false alarms. Those continue to, they're pretty standard of any response model. I don't have an exact percentage for you. However, you know, just this year alone, we've already been at 16 working structure fires. Now, that's a little abnormally high than we're usually at, but nonetheless, I mean, these anomalies happen, and we need the people to be able to mitigate those. But yeah, false alarms are always going to happen as long as there's alarm systems out there and sprinkler systems and smoke detectors. They're just going to happen. So I don't see any correlation between our false alarm going up as in relation to our total call volume. It's more EMS than anything. About 80% of the runs we do are EMS related, 20% are fire related.
Thank you, Jude.
Okay, we'll do a last call for questions, and there is a little bit more, I think, to present here. Alder Knott?
I still have 3 more.
Okay.
So first off, when I look at the chart on page 25, the number of personnel assigned to call, where, I mean, the vast plethora, I guess, I'd have to do the numbers if it's the majority. It looks like it's pretty close, not quite. Are the two personnel calls. Now, I'm assuming most of those are EMS and not fire. Is that what that is?
So what those are, because we are cross-staffed, there's 2 people on the rescue. So minimum staffing is 4. So on a day we have 2 people on the rescue, and we're short-staffed on the engine. We have 2 people on that. So those are incidences where EMS was either already on another call and we sent an engine with only 2 people. Or, you know, that's the highest likelihood of why there's only 2 on that calls, because another truck was out doing something else. Or we get carbon monoxide calls, gas leak calls. That's an engine, we call it a response. And so again, if only 2 or 3 people were assigned to that engine, that's what goes. Now the other end of the spectrum where there was only 2 instances where there was 13 people, and that's the most we've had on any fire instance in the last 3 years. Would have been probably a longer term structure fire where we were short 4 members on that.
So these are all fire responses.
Fire response is correct.
So those 2 are the 630 or 55 2-person responses. Those are for actual fire alarms, fire calls type of.
Anything that's not coded for EMS or car accident.
Okay, all right.
NIFRS codes are divided out into, that's how we break them out of there. Is anything that mentions a fire, whether it's a dryer fire, I'm just using some examples. A fire in an open area, meaning like a veranda, something covered. It doesn't necessarily mean the house is on fire. It means we have a fire.
I got it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a carbon monoxide incident. We might have 6 in house where we're just going to send 2 or 4 people to that. Because again, we're trying to cross staff and handle multiple calls, knowing that our overlapping calls are going up. We're trying to keep as many in house as possible.
Well, you answered what I was looking for. That is not EMS is the bottom line.
Correct.
Okay. And then I guess quick comment and then another question. So over the last several years, when we get our reports on population and what have you, our population is pretty much stabilized. And I think that's largely because the growth in the city has slowed down. We're pretty much out of room. New structures have slowed down even since I've been here. And yet the number of of calls is still continuing on a pretty steady glide path. And I'm just curious on how that could possibly be. It can't just be for an aging population, for instance. I mean, something is accounting for this, and I don't know what it could possibly be. And I'm intrigued by that, and I'm wondering if that's something we need to look at. I don't know.
Yeah, we're certainly not unique. I think you're seeing this, and it's mainly due to an aging population. EMS calls are going up in
Okay.
every city. They're seeing increases. So a lot of that call volume is driven by that.
Okay.
And we've got part of our community risk reduction program is to try to either get that to plane out or go down by doing things like our fall coalition or installing smoke detectors in homes. And like all of these community risk programs that we're doing as well are in a hopes to either get that number to plateau or to go down to
Okay.
sort of the preventative end of, emergency response. Prevent it before it happens.
And my last one, Mayor, is a comment followed by a question on that comment is, so my understanding is that the NFPA standards, they're not constrained by resources when those standards are developed. This is an unconstrained resource environment when they develop those standards.
Maybe I'll answer the question this way. When state and federal put together recommendations or requirements, they don't fund them. As an example, and he hit the nail on the head, when Bill got hired, I'll pick on Bill, he probably didn't have to have a whole lot to get on a rig. Now you have to have 2 courses that amount to six months and thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
So the chief can't even put anybody in a fire who hasn't been through. It's on the second last page is all the requirements that a firefighter needs.
All right.
So typically it's mandated, but there's no financial relief.
Right. So, and now the follow-up question to that is do we know the percent of departments nationwide that actually meet or exceed those NFPA standards?
State meter,
I'm going to guess it's probably very few. I could be wrong.
yeah. The goal is to get there.
Of course. Yeah.
So maybe to piggyback on that is that I don't anticipate us being at 17 career members on our department anytime real soon. It's a financial constraint that I don't think that we can just hit on. But what we're faced with responding with 4 people or 6 people is we're picking and choosing what is the highest priority. Is putting the fire out the priority, or is, pulling a victim out a priority? We can't do both. So I think our goal is to find a way to do the best that we can with whatever resources.
I agree with that. I think there's a balance between need and resources that we need to look at, but yeah, I agree. Okay.
To reiterate, too, I think your larger population centers, your larger cities meet that NFPA standard at a much higher rate than a city about the size of Alaska.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions before we go to the next section? Okay, Dan Stevens.
I believe between censuses, the city of Onalaska still had a more than a 10% growth rate. So I don't think that we're to the point where we're saying that we are plateauing. It's in a 10-year period. And then remember, we also absorbed the fire protection for the town of Onalaska, which has a lot more room to growth. And then thirdly, the new developments that we have tend to be higher density, like multifamily apartment buildings. So we are still growing. At some point it's going to stop, but I don't think we're at a point where I would declare that we've plateaued. That's just my opinion.
You say 10% growth over 10 years.
Yes.
Is what you're saying. Yeah. Because I mean, I'm seeing the annual ones that are reported to us, and I just don't see that. Yeah.
Okay, Alder Milky.
Yeah, just one quick question. You probably don't have the data now, but I'd just be curious if we can get it. Do we know the percentage of calls that come from the town of Onalaska for fire and EMS? I'm just
Yes.
curious. Do
Yeah.
you have that?
I don't have it right in front of me, but it was around 124 calls last year in total of that 2,227.
We anticipate around 200 is what we try to plan for. And it's, I think the first year was probably closer to that 200 number. Last year was lower, but this year we have been to the town
Numerous.
a lot. So it's going to be, it's one of those that we can try to predict, but it's the needle will move regularly.
I just was curious what.
200 is kind of the number, so I would say around 10% or a
Yeah.
little less than 10%.
Chief, go ahead. I think you had a comment about that population.
Yeah, I just had, so when we talk about, a high density housing, I want you to think about, just what we have to offer for resources, what we need for resources to get people out of a building like that that's on fire. Yes, they are sprinkled. But to think about getting all those folks out of that building also while trying to find out if there is an actual fire. And if there is an actual fire, how are we going to get that put out? So those buildings actually require more resources than a typical single family home. So.
Thank you. Okay, any other alders have any questions or comments before we move to the next section here? Okay, Larry Jurassic.
Mr. Chair. Do you have a breakdown as far as how many EMS calls are actual EMS calls and not just I twisted my ankle or CPR?
I would argue that anybody that calls 911 is probably we have to get away from like, do I believe that this is a 911 call versus, does Chief Floody believe this is, his view may be different than mine. We work with the Aging and Disability Resource Center too, for some of the calls that we would call maybe ones that we have triaged and felt like they're pushing the envelope of abusing the system. I don't know that I would be so far as to like guess that anybody that calls 911 is doing it just, in not believing that they need help of some sort.
Is it more of an education that?
Both, yes, and that falls into the community risk reduction too, is trying to educate some of these people. Falls are one of our number one EMS calls and trying to educate them on the,
Even
to lessen that.
Anymore, so.
Every once in a while.
I will.
Chief, why don't you have a final comment and then we'll go with the next section of the.
Thank you. And
presentation.
just to kind of reference that a little bit too, Alder Jurassic, is that last year we kind of took a step forward in working with Tri-State Ambulance and got a refusal. So if that patient decided that they didn't need to go to the hospital, we get there, we take a blood pressure, they're good to go. I'm fine. I fell. I'm not hurt. Just needed help up. We can get a refusal signed right there on scene and get our rig back in service as soon as possible. So we're trying to address that as well.
I was a paramedic for a while, so I know the.
Yes, I know you're aware of that. Yep.
Okay, Chuck, take it away. Thank
Thank you.
you.
All right, so we've gotten through the operations piece of it. Now we'll talk about the buildings. This is the facilities assessment portion. As I mentioned, I was responsible for this portion of the work. So when we're doing our condition reporting and space needs, we're looking at a couple of different things. We're looking at facility concerns, but we're also looking at the health and safety concerns. Chuck mentioned the health and safety concerns when you're at a live fire scene. There are still health and safety concerns when you're in quarters as well. So the facility concerns that we observed in this particular building was there's really no definite separation between police and fire vehicles. For a number of different reasons, whether it's loading vehicles, truck checks, just keeping things on the fire side and other things on the police side, there really should be some separation between those functions. Chuck mentioned the operational inefficiency. We talk about where the staff quarters are located to the truck floor and where administration is versus where the truck floor is located. We did observe the fact that to try to increase some of that turnout time, we're seeing the fire department getting very creative with their space in terms of maybe moving some exercise equipment up to the truck floor. That starts to, again, nibble away at that health and safety issue. You're inside an apparatus bay where one, there's vehicle movement, and two, there's vehicle exhaust. Probably not the best environment to be working out in. So that was one of the observations that we noted. When we get to the actual codes, IBC, International Building Codes, the state of Wisconsin is controlled by the International Building Code Model 2015. When this building was built 25 years ago, the rules were different. So now that the rules have changed, when we look at things like addressing these particular issues or doing renovations to the building, we have to take into consideration some of these new practices in terms of codes in the ADA. So we have to look at, some of the stair landing sizes. We have to look at the ADA toilet room or the toilet rooms to make sure they're ADA. The other thing is that basically they're just out of space, right? They're a welcoming resource and amenity for some of the other departments, but there's 8 other city committees and departments that use their training and conference room. So when you look at efficiency in terms of that, there's some gains to be made there and just giving them some additional room. That lower image that you see up there, there's a fire department training prop, but it's up against Parks and Recreation storage. So there's swim noodles right up against some of the training props that the fire department's using. So, just to give them a little bit more elbow room would be helpful in a lot of these different considerations. Health and safety concerns. So there's a lack of decontamination areas. One of the things that we look at when we design modern day fire stations is incorporating best practices. And one of those best practices is to mitigate carcinogens and cancer causing agents that are in these departments. They come back from a fire, their personnel, their PPE, their equipment, their tools, all have carcinogens on them. They have to decontaminate those in the proper areas before those staff are allowed to go back into living quarters, or they're just taking those contaminants with them. So that's one of the areas that we saw that really could use some help is in a decontamination area that's in what we consider a hot or a warm zone before the staff enters the cold zone or their living quarters. Lack of lobby security from the public is I don't have to beat that one up. You can see how accessible both police and fire are to the general public. And what we're doing again with these best practices, we're designing in hardening elements within these buildings now to keep the public at bay. Civil unrest is at an all-time high. Everybody says, well, it can't happen in my community. Chuck can tell you what happened in Kenosha, and we didn't have any, we were doing a fire station for him at the time, and we had no idea it was going to escalate to that level. So being safe and secure in this day and age is of paramount importance. Just looking at, they've got a SCBA compressor. It gets its outside air from basically near the truck apron. So if a truck is idling on the apron and somebody's filling SCBA air packs, they're bringing that outside air in that's potentially contaminated with that exhaust and putting it in the breathing air apparatus. So we would recommend obviously rerouting the location of where that intake goes. There are no accommodations for nursing mothers, and quite frankly, the gender mix and opportunities for female firefighters is at a lower level than what we see in most communities in terms of providing accommodations for both male and female firefighters. The industry's changing. We're bringing on more and more females. Every department, every fire station we're currently working on as a paramount importance because of that mix of we're getting more and more female firefighters. As I mentioned, there's exercise equipment on the truck floor. We talk about this turnout time, right? So Chuck's explaining how long it takes from the time you get the call to the time you get on the truck to the time you get on scene. Right now, the average turnout time based on a person walking 3 miles an hour from all points of the station is roughly 37 seconds from the time they get the call to the time they're on the floor and on the truck. We'll talk about what some best practices might do to help improve that time. We look at some future slides here. We talked about this heat mapping. Again, this was really a dual purpose identifier, right? So we need to know if there's a new station, where's it going to go? Where's the most efficient place for the fire department to respond within the community based on where the incidents are, where the population is. It also helps us in identifying where maybe some potential land is coming from. We heard a comment during Chuck's presentation, running out of space, right? Where are you going to find land to buy and build a station? We need to explore that at this level. Even though we're looking out 5 and 10 years in our recommendations, now is the time to start looking for some of that property. So that really does help us. When we look at this heat map, you see the dark blue area. That's the shortest response time. And as you get lighter in color, the purple and the yellow, that's the longer response times. We ran 10 different mapping analysis for this particular study with our GIS specialist to pinpoint where the where roughly the location would need to be for future based on density, population, the aging community. So that's what these diagrams helped us with. And I can show you what that looks like in this particular slide. So the three yellow dots would be the potential locations, you know, where the central city is and you know where we're standing today. But what that does to the drive times and response times, and I'll flip back because it's telling. In terms of response time, there's very little blue area there, right? And the purple's somewhat expansive. But if we look at what we do, if we just add one or two different stations in different locations, what that means to response time. And that's basically essentially what it is all about at the end of the day. So your current location meets the needs of most of the community, but it falls short in those high response areas that Chuck pointed out. So then as we develop the space needs, so what we were tasked with is what does the department have and what does the department need, right? To look at staffing. So this goes hand in glove with the information that Chuck unearths. So when we know how many heads are in beds, we know how many rigs are going to be parked there. We know how many people are going to be serving out of those particular stations. It gives us an understanding of the size or the footprint that we need for those facilities. So the current program is in an acceptable range for a department of its size. They have adequate square footage. Could they use more? Yes. Could they use some more storage? Yes. Could they use some more conference space? Yes. But they can accommodate the quote unquote, the heads that they have in the beds. It's just not very efficient to get to the truck floor. As I mentioned, it's 37 seconds to get through the station. Long-range staffing and community projections are going to drive our recommendations. With the addition of satellite stations, if we were king for a day, we could build one more station somewhere in a strategic location. This location would be adequate for the near future. They could keep an engine company here. They could keep staff here and supplement and complement it with an additional location, cut down on their response times. So basically that's where we came up with our recommendations. So the long range operation and what a snapshot of what this looks like is phase one would include a new station on a preferred site. That station would be roughly 25,000 square feet. And I'll show you quickly what a test fit like that looks like. Phase two would be another station by 2035. So 10 years from now of roughly 22,000 square feet if we were going to go with that 3-station model. And again, to your earlier comment, that's the pie in the sky. Any improvement on that is a step forward. We're just telling you where you should be or where you would need to be if your head count got to that point and if your community continues to grow and your call volume continues to grow within the community. So we take that programming data, we figured out what they had, we figured out what they needed in terms of parking additional rigs and staff in those locations, and we came up with those test fits that you see up there. We also built in those best practices that I mentioned for gender equity and decontamination. So those are all built into these test models here. You can see that one station's roughly 25,000 square feet, the other's 22,000 square feet. The average turnout time in those models, because of the efficiency being on one level and adjacent, relatively close and adjacent to the truck floor, the farthest distance from one of those bunk rooms was 23 seconds. So we shaved 14 seconds off our response time by getting everything arranged properly, if you will. So from there, then we feel it's prudent to give you an understanding, just like Chuck did on the headcount growth side. What does the city have to do in terms of capital investment for this? And so what we do is we come up with what we consider as a basis of design. So you're gonna agree to build a fire station. You're gonna say, well, if we're gonna build it, we better build it for the future. It's got to be a 50-year building, right? So understanding what that means in terms of its construction is where we come in with the basis of design. So we don't have, these are all the lines that we have on paper today, right? So what we have to do is make assumptions as to what that building is constructed of. And so we use a baseline for construction methods and materials, understanding it's a 50-year building. So it's likely going to be masonry. And then we look at different types of interior building systems, vehicle exhaust, all of those types of things. And that gets in a level of finish, right? What does it look like inside? And using current data that we have on all the fire stations we're currently working on, we build an financial model to tell you what a 25,000 square foot fire station of this particular construction or basis of design looks like. So we're able to develop these costs in 2025 dollars for both of those phases. So the phase one station is roughly a $9 million build. What we had to do is assume a land acquisition for it. And basically how we determined that was we looked at the cost per acre in the local real estate market and made some assumptions. Could it be more than that? Yes. Could it be less than that? It could be. I'm working on a fire station right now in a community where a local philanthropist donated the property for it because he felt that a fire station in that location was the most beneficial for the community. So that number is going to fluctuate, right? The construction number is going to be pretty solid based on cost per square foot. Then you've got to look at things, we call them soft costs, but you've got to pay the architects, the engineers, and the state to review it, that sort of thing. And then you've got to put furnishings in there. So you can't take the stuff away from the firefighters that are here to put it in a new facility, or the people that are left behind won't have anything. So by the end of the day, in 2025 dollars, it's about an $11.9 million project. And then in the second phase, it's about a $10.6 million project. When we look at that, so then the next question we get is, well, we can't afford that. What can we do, right? What happens if we just put this on hold for a couple of years? This inflation escalator on here was created specifically post-COVID when market volatility was through the roof. So I've been doing this 34 years, and for the last 25, it's been 3% inflation, labor and materials. It's pretty steady Eddie. Then we got into the COVID years, and we've got into the economic situation we're in now with booming tariffs and everything like that. Now we're saying, no, you got to hit that number with about 6% inflation. So on a $10 million or $9 million build, you're talking about a $500,000 increase in cost every year that we delay. And I'm going through this right now on a fire station that we did the study for in 2023, and it was a $7 million fire station, and now it's a $9 million fire station. In 2 years, it went up $2 million, is what we're hearing from the construction manager at this point. So I guess basically what I'm saying is that if there's opportunity to seize land or plan ahead for this, it's our recommendation that you follow both suggestions in terms of the staffing model and the facilities model to get the department where it needs to be. Can you do it all overnight? No, but I think what you need to do is turn an eye to the future and determine how the community could somehow start to take steps in the right direction. So I'll close with this slide. Our near and long-term recommendations are prioritize the recommendations around staffing. You need to get the bodies on scene, firefighters on scene, to address the safety issues around attacking a working fire. Explore land purchases, right? So we put a couple dots on a map in a general neighborhood and location. You might want to work with community development. You might want to work with city staff, engineering to determine what's available out there and maybe start those conversations. Plan for the station operations and expansion. So you know that this particular station, if they take more heads and put them in beds, there's probably going to need to be a modest investment in accommodations for those additional staff. Basically, like I said, their size of the building is okay right now for the number of staff they have. You bring more staff in, you might need to create some temporary accommodations as a stopgap until you can afford to build the new station. And don't invest significantly in this existing facility. What we've determined is it's got good bones. It's in good shape for its age. You're doing maintenance things with the roof and the PV panels and some other things, which is great. But in terms of investing large dollars on the fire side of the wall, I'd tap the brakes on that, and I would just do what you need to do to accommodate some additional headcount. So basically, these two reports are complementary, and they're really a holistic approach to the future of service for the Onalaska Fire Department. So I will pause there. I will address any questions. I tried to get you through the building piece of it as quickly as I could. It's the piece that's not as broke, right? And so it's a little easier to talk through. I didn't mean to breeze through anything. If there's something you saw you want me to go back and revisit, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Sure. First, let me ask Chief and Jeremy, did he miss anything really significant that you want to highlight? I feel like he did good, but maybe he missed something.
Oh, look good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, counselors, let's start on this side this time. Larry, did you have any questions or comments?
I'm going to pass right now, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Alder Stevens?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just as a general rule of thumb, I'm of the opinion when we're making long-term capital purchases for whether it's public safety or anything else, that we should, if we're going to do it right. Don't skimp out to save a little bit on square footage, and can look at what the needs are of the community, not just this year, but 20, 50, 100 years from now. So, I think sums up my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Milkey?
Thank you. Just a quick question. How many rooms do we have upstairs currently for people if they were staying?
7.
Okay, so
Or, yeah, 7.
because I know one of the immediate concerns is staffing, right? So if we were to bring in, obviously more, what do we do with that space?
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had, because we want to address staffing first, because that's where our real significant area need is. I mean, we need both, but talk to SEH a little bit, and they could design temporary areas if you were building a second fire station. So that's what we'd have to do. I mean, we can add one more today if we wanted to per shift, and have enough rooms, but otherwise we'd have to do a little remodeling.
Because ideally, we don't want to put bunk beds in. I'm just kidding, guys.
About the mayor's office.
Yeah, at the risk of having things thrown at me, I think staffing is a big concern. And I think if we had to get unique I think if that was a long-term solution, there may be, mutiny, if you will. But that is not uncommon necessarily, of having people share a room, but not optimal by any means. But that's a trend that's going away in the fire service, just because it just is. It's not comfortable sleeping in the same room with somebody else. But if in a short-term goal, I think that we would probably look at making some sort of accommodations for that. But one per shift is our max, like what we're set up for right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I have one question. I know what we've used in the past in our minds, but what is your recommendation for the minimum parcel size for the station 1 or 2, the parcel size?
Yeah, our recommendation would be a minimum of 2 to 2.5 acres. That would give you the 25,000 square foot station. It would give you adequate space for parking. It would also give you some overflow space if they had, each of these has a training room or large conference room in them. So if they brought staff from other stations, other departments, there would be adequate parking and adequate movement area on the site. We also looked at that in terms of, could that potentially be something like a polling site, for example, during elections? And I get it, you don't build the church for Christmas and Easter, but if it could allow some pressure relief from facilities on election days, especially presidential election days, what would that look like? So it takes into account some of that added parking. It does take into account some of that movement. And then we also talked about, if we could find the right size site, the potential for some type of a training ground out there, whether it's just extrication training, hose testing, some of the other stuff that takes up a lot of real estate that you guys are doing right out the back here and down the city streets now, to relieve that pressure from this central location. We'd like to build some of those features in out there so they don't have to do that here on the site.
Thank you. Alder McAllister? Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just one quick follow-up to what Mayor Kim just mentioned. So you would recommend 2 to 2.5 acres for both of the 2 stations?
Yes, each site would be 2 to 2.5 acres. That's correct.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Alder Not?
A couple. So first off, just information wise, we were given two charts up on the screen that showed the drive times. One was for the single station that we have now, and one was for the 3-station. Just to let you know that on page 45 of the staffing and facility study, there is also a heat map for the 2-station, northeast and southeast, that have the drive times too. So just, you can look that up. Phase 1 and 2 that we have here, where we have the land and construction costs, those do not include cost of any additional equipment. Was that in here somewhere that I missed?
No, the additional equipment was not in there. I think we're sitting pretty well right now, especially for phase 1. As we move into phase 2, we may need to look at purchasing another engine. But right now, we currently have 2 ladder trucks. The goal is we just opened bids this morning on replacing one of those trucks with a pumper tender, which is going to qualify as an engine. So at that point, we're already going to have 3 engines. We're going to have 1 ladder truck. I think for a community our size, 1 ladder truck will suffice. If we can house an engine at each station, that would suffice for each of the 3 stations if you were to build 3. And we have 2 rescue trucks right now. So you might be looking at a rescue way into phase 2, but we currently have 2 rescues as we sit.
Okay.
The idea would be to as well put the boat closest to obviously the river, and put the ladder truck out in the more commercial areas and more organize your resources to where they're most likely going to go.
But phase 1 would be no additional equipment. Phase 2 would have some.
We
Also no.
possibly for stage 2. Phase 1, we don't.
Clearly, if we
We're
went to
good.
3 stations, we would need more equipment.
Yeah, likely, yes.
Okay. Most of my other comments, if not all, are with the situation as it is now that was in the facility study. I see some easy fixes that were listed in there that alders we might want to be looking at. There were a couple of ADA compliance issues that came up that probably should be looked at on the near term, because we're not going to be leaving this facility for some years. Even in a phase 1, we're still here. And then also it concerned me with the training, not the training room, the workout room, I believe it was, where you said that there were issues with monitoring the calls. That was in the workout room, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's something we should take a look at, I would think, too.
And we have tried to do some fixes, and I would piggyback that on to not just the fitness room downstairs, but our training room is also underneath the finance department as well. And it's a radio dead zone. So essentially we have somebody hanging out in the hallway monitoring, because if we're all in that room training, we just don't get the
There
radio.
should be a fix to that, though. I mean, it's just a repeater or something. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even in the CIP for coming up here, I think it's in I'm probably not going to get the year right, 27 or 28, I have a station alerting system in there, which would remedy that. It would.
Yeah, again, what I'm getting out here is just to put it in our minds that this is something we need to really be looking at. Some of these should be easy fixes. As far as some of the shared space comments that were in the facilities, can be a concern, might not be. So I'll give you one example. When you're talking the shared space with the police. Oh, by the way, with the police storage unit that we're moving forward to, I'm assuming that will also alleviate some of the concerns you have with the current shared space, because some of their stuff I would think might move out.
Yeah, that would be the plan, is to give more area to the PD if we move out. Yep.
All right, and then other areas with shared space. I know one of the things you mentioned in here was concerns over, the facility hardening response to unrest, things of that nature. Well, in that case, that would be a positive for sharing the space with the police department, because you would have the police on site with the fire department. So I'm just saying it's not an either or. There's issues that are competing against each other here. And then the other one was some of the shared facilities, such as the training room, came up. So when it comes to facilities, there is facilities that will be dedicated use. Obviously, that's the ideal for everything, but that is the most expensive. And a lot of those facilities would be unused for a good portion of the time if we went that route. So I'm just bringing some, I guess, kind of a realistic look at this. Now, there's certain things that that have to be dedicated use. An example would be where you store your firefighter PPE. You're not going to share that with somebody. But with the training room, there's priority use too on who has priority use. I know we've mentioned with, there was also a nursing room for nursing mothers, things of that nature. Those things I would think we'd want to be looking at. How do we use multi-use? But maybe with giving the fire department priority on these things. That's where I'm going with this. Omni Center is a good example. The only reason, now it's an apple and an orange. It's not emergency response, but in my mind, the only reason that the Omni Center has become financially viable is because they went to multi-use. And how do we turn this facility from ice rinks into multi-use facilities? And it's been very successful. So I don't think we're going to get away from multi-use facilities to an extent. And even if we were to construct on a phase one, there might be things we want to look at if we're going to buy this land. Is there cost savings, for instance, if in addition to the facility that the fire department wants, we might have additional construction on that building that might be for DPW or for Parks and Rec, as an example. You would still have what you need, but we'd save money with a single construction. So multi-use to me, it doesn't sell easily with me personally as a concern unless it's impeding your mission, I guess is where I'm going. So, all right.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, back to you, Chuck. Have any other things you want to add?
No, I think I picked up on the high points of the study and our recommendations, and I appreciate your time and attention to this. It was, like I said, it was 5 months in the making, and I think it came together pretty well. I think the recommendations are concise. They give you a big picture, long-term, where in baby steps, what you need to do to get there. And I think it would set you up well for success if you just followed some of the recommendations.
Oh, thank you. I know I personally really appreciated the study. I think it took a lot of the things that most of us already knew and put it together in a picture that's, I think, easy to share with a lot of people, to have the visuals and to put it together in a story that we can tell and that we can use as a visionary piece to help us find our way forward. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of your hard work and the input from everybody. Pete, did you want to add anything before we close?
No, just to echo what you said, I'm really appreciative of SEH's time, and they spent a lot of time here, both virtually and in person. So really appreciate that. And I think they did a really good job. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, then we'll go on to item 4, discussion regarding the collaboration on Department of Revenue Innovation Planning Grant concerning fire protection with the town of Onalaska, the Village of Home, and the town of Holland, and the city of Onalaska. Pete, do you want to talk about this? This is just a information item.
Yeah, it's pretty much information only at this point. In short, last week at the Town of Holland Board meeting, it was approved, they applied or approved to apply for a Department of Revenue Innovation Planning Grant to conduct more of a regional study of fire protection services for City of Onalaska, Town of Onalaska, Village of Holman, and the Town of Holland. And the basis of this grant or this study, grant to do the study, is to determine if there's any available savings to the area. So the grant was only available to municipalities 5,000 in population and under. This is part of the Department of Revenue Innovation Funding Program, which there's $300 million total. And of that 300 million, there's 3 million carved out for studies for this purpose, just to determine if there's any efficiencies that can be made by innovation and combining. So that's all part of Act 12. The study won't cost us anything. It's not our study. It's a Town of Holland study, but it's more information to let you know that we are going to be involved in that study. Questions will be asked of us. What's our staffing level? What are a lot of the things we discussed tonight will probably be asked of us. So just wanted to let you know that that's out there. And if you hear anything about it, that's what it is. So right now in the process, the Town of Holland is in the application process for the planning grant. We don't know if it's approved yet even, but just wanted to make you all aware that it's out there.
Yeah, and I think the next part is if the study is done and favorable, then maybe go on and say what could happen then.
Correct. Yeah. After that, that remaining $297 million of that innovation funding grant, if there are efficiencies that we can take advantage of, we would then be eligible. And if we wanted to move in that direction, then we would be eligible for those additional dollars or a portion of those additional dollars. We need to show a 10% efficiency though. It's 10% cost savings with this grant. So money's out there. It's a free study for us. It's more information, I think, to add into the whole picture. So I don't see it as a bad thing.
No. And importantly, an opportunity for us to partner with our neighbors
Yes.
to try to just improve the efficiency of firefighting across our region. It's something we all want to do. All right, Alder
Is
Stevens.
this a federal grant that we were looking at?
No, the state, the Department of Revenue. Yep.
And then we had the traffic safety federal grant that looked like that was maybe in jeopardy. So this is solid.
Yeah. It was extended, right? The due date was
Yes, yep.
extended, which is,
I think it's extended into April even now. And then last that we heard at a conference last week is that there were 77 applicants at this time and they put priority on public safety. The ones that applied for public safety specifically. So.
It just opened up in January. So they've been extending the timeline because those funds, so that $3 million has not been used up yet. And the goal is so the quicker they apply for that grant, the better their chances. So
We thought what a better opportunity. Holman's active in a study of their own right now. We just wrapped up a study, and if we can take a holistic approach and look at, if we saw a pie in the sky, pie in the eye. Instead of us looking at building a 3-station model and Holman looking at a 3-station model, would it make more sense to look at it as a region? And, you could cut down on the efficiencies, so we're not duplicating resources. So I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's a unique opportunity that I was not expecting to hear about. So I'm optimistic. So if anything else, it'll just reiterate a lot of the things that we're already hearing about. So.
okay, that is pretty much our agenda. Does anyone have anything else they want to comment on or ask about? All right, that brings us to item 5, adjournment.
move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor by Stephen Knott. It's been seconded by Diane Wolf to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? We are adjourned and the time is 6:43. Thank you everyone for coming.